How's it going, guys? Rhino here. I got a new microphone, so first off, let me know how that sounds because I don't know if I set it up properly. I don't know if I need to change the settings or anything, so just let me know quickly about that. But essentially, I'm making a video based on the title about how you can afford a Nissan GTR. It's something I get asked a lot. And then also, the second part I'm going to talk about is how I afforded a GTR. So basically, I do a lot of Q&As on my Instagram. My Instagram, every time I get 1,000 followers, 1,000 new followers, I do a Q&A. And one of the most frequent questions asked, actually the most frequent question asked, is something along the lines of, how did you afford a Nissan GTR at your age? Or how can I afford a Nissan GTR? Talking about that person. And so I wanted to make a video to really go into a detailed response about how to afford a Nissan GTR, how I afforded a Nissan GTR, and I just wanted to kind of help you guys out with that. This video will be broken down into two parts. It'll be the first part. I'm going to be talking about kind of general tips and the best practices for you to be able to afford a Nissan GTR that you can apply to pretty much any big purchase. But I'm going to be applying it specifically to a Nissan GTR. The second part of the video, I'm going to be talking about how I personally afforded the GTR, how I went through the searching process, and how I made sure I could afford it, and then finally the buying process. And then I have a couple things I want to mention at the end. So that's essentially going to be the layout of the video. Let's dive right in. So one thing I get DM'd a lot on Instagram is, hey, I love your car. I'm going to have one when I'm older. And I absolutely love hearing this, but it also scares me at the same time. I love seeing that drive, and I want people to be able to afford the cars and luxuries that they want to be able to afford. But the problem is that when they say I'm going to afford it when I'm older, they might not actually be planning properly for the future and may just be assuming that in the future they're going to be making more money, therefore they're going to be able to afford a Nissan GTR. And that might be likely, but there's other factors that play in. I know every single one watching this video, if you work hard, every single one of you can afford a Nissan GTR. Every single one of you, regardless of your situation. But you just have to plan properly, work properly, and be willing to put in that effort to get to where you need to be to afford a Nissan GTR. But if you try to put it off and you don't focus on it, you could end up like the guy who was the GM of the plant that I work at. He makes a lot of money. This guy makes a ridiculous amount of money. He could easily afford a Nissan GTR based on the amount that he makes. However, because he waited to buy a nice car, he's now in a situation where he has a wife, kids, and house. It's not a smart move for him to afford a Nissan GTR, to buy a Nissan GTR right now, despite the fact that he loved my Nissan GTR, he loves McLarens. He was on the McLaren website right before I bought my Nissan GTR from that McLaren, actually. Because he has these dreams of owning these really nice cars. And he has a nice BMW, but it's nothing like a supercar. And the reason why he's not able to achieve these dreams is because he waited and now he's not able to afford the Nissan GTR. Theoretically, he can, but it wouldn't be a smart decision for him to make. Whereas as someone in my situation where I make significantly less than him, it is a smarter move for me because I can afford it right now. I don't have those responsibilities. I'm not married. I don't have kids. I don't have a house I need to put money into. So my first big tip is to start planning right now. Not a year from now, not 2 years from now, not 5 years from now. Right this second. Start making a plan as soon as you can. The more detailed the plan, the better. I would suggest by starting to make what's called a Gantt chart, G-A-N-T-T. It's something that we learned at work and it applies mostly to capital projects, but it can absolutely apply to this. A Gantt chart is quite simply beginning with the end in mind, where you can create an Excel document and you write a date, and that date is buying the Nissan GTR or receiving the Nissan GTR if you want to go a step further, because that date can vary sometimes. And then from there, you simply work backwards. You go step by step what you need to do to get from where you're at right now to buying that Nissan GTR, but working backwards so you know. And you can be, the more detailed, the better. And the more all around the plan is, the better. So be sure to set a goal. And the best way to do this is to take a look at your paycheck and understand after you take out obviously your taxes, after you take out things like rent and everything like that, how much take-home income do you have? If it's too low, are you able to get a better job or a second or third job to supplement that income? You really need to nail down how much money you're keeping out of every paycheck. And you want to be sure you're conservative on this because you're going to set a plan. So if your plan is, let's say, $200 a month, you're setting aside towards the Nissan GTR. That's fine, and that's a great goal to set. But be sure you're keeping in mind all those regular expenses you have and then things like incidental expenses that can pop up out of nowhere that you don't know are coming. So be sure to set that goal, however much it is, and follow that goal as strictly as you can. And save money on top of that. If you are setting a goal of $200 per month saved in every paycheck, do whatever you can to increase that amount. So if you can save money on, say, your cable bill and increase that amount to $250 a month, that's an extra 25% that you are adding to each individual installment deposit into your bank account, which will only increase your goal. So following your Gantt chart, it would be speeding up your Gantt chart, moving your final goal forward. But when you make that plan, absolutely be sure to stick to it. One thing a lot of people do, for example, with diets, is they start a diet. They stick to that diet for a while, and then they start adding cheat days. And then they start adding 2 cheat days. And then lo and behold, there's no more diet. With this, you want to be as strict as you can. And even, let's say 1 month, you save $250 instead of $200, that doesn't mean the next month you can only save $150. You want to keep your goal of $200 a month as strictly as you can. Don't stray from that unless you have an incidental that you can't avoid. Your car breaks down and you need to pay for the repairs. Okay, obviously go for that. But if it's a debate about, whether I go out to dinner or not, don't do it. Find a cheaper way to save money. A cheaper way to eat, to save more money, so that way you are sticking to your goal, because your goal will streamline you to where you're able to afford the Nissan GTR. Take a look at all of your expenses, document every single one, and take a look at where you can cut back on expenses. Some of the most obvious ones are eating out. It's really easy to cut back on how often you eat out, which will save a ridiculous amount of money. If you smoke cigarettes, try cutting back or quitting altogether. That'll save you money. If you drink alcohol on a regular basis, try cutting back or cutting that out entirely. That will save you money. If you go to Starbucks every morning or frequently, try cutting that out. That will save you money. And just make coffee at home. Whatever you need to do to save money, take a look at as many options as you can to save money. I would also recommend at some point, if you're in high school or college, or even if you're not, if you're out of college, or you didn't go to college, I recommend taking an accounting and finance class at some point if you can. An online course maybe, or go to a community college, whatever you may need to do to take it. You learn some very, very critical skills when it comes to dealing with money that you don't learn outside of finance and accounting classes. And these are skills that they honestly should teach instead of some of the stupid shit that they teach in high school and college. Instead of learning the Pythagorean theorem, how about you teach people how to pay their fucking taxes? But it's not even really about passing that class unless you are in college, you need the credit for it, or you need the grade. It's more about what you can learn, the concepts that you can learn, and how you can apply it to real life, including this situation of saving up for your dream car. But most importantly, when you build this plan, be sure you don't put yourself in a shitty situation. Don't put yourself in a situation where you just can't get by, where you are just absolutely not living. You're not living your life. You are barely eating. You're barely having fun. Don't do that. Don't cut that completely out, because it's not worth it in the end. Be sure that your plan is comfortable for you. When I was doing it, and I'm going to get more into this when I get to my portion, when I was doing it, I made damn sure that I got that monthly payment down to an amount where I could still live comfortably outside of that, and still be able to buy stuff for my girlfriend, still be able to have fun, still be able to afford everything that I need to. You need to be able to do that. Don't put yourself in such a tight situation where you can't afford anything else. And it boils down to things that are in your control and things that are not in your control. And the things that are not in your control, you have to be aware of, but you can't do anything about, so don't complain about. So for example, I was born into a wealthy family. As a result, my parents were awesome enough to pay for my college. So I didn't accrue any debt while I was in college. I came out of college debt-free. I came out of college actually positive because I worked an internship that paid well during college. So I came out of college with money. Not very many people are able to do that. If you aren't able to afford college, or your parents weren't able to pay for your college, or whatever it may be, and you took on student debt, that's something you have to keep in mind. But it's not something you can control. It's an incidental. It's something outside of your control. This doesn't mean that you can't afford a Nissan GTR. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to afford a Nissan GTR. What this means is that you'll simply have to work harder on the things that you can control to overcompensate for the things you can't control, so that way you can afford the Nissan GTR. You'll have to work harder, But I promise you that if you work harder and you achieve your goal, it's going to feel that much better when you get there. It's going to feel even better for you to own a GTR than it will for me, because you had to work that much harder to get there. So be sure to compensate for those incidentals, those things outside of your control. Compensate for them by working as hard as you can. If it means taking on an extra job, go for it. If it means working extra hours, go for it. Whatever you need to do to get there, you can do it, because you really need to chase your dreams. You really do. The Nissan GTR was my dream car until I had one. I mean, it still technically is, but I have my dream car. If you chase your dreams, great things will happen, I promise. Now let's get on to the second part, which is another part of the question that I get asked a lot, which is how I personally afford it, and then also kind of the process that I went through in realizing that I can afford it, how I went on purchasing it and everything like that. So I had certain things in my life that allowed me to afford the Nissan GTR a lot easier than it will be for a lot of other people. Like I said, my parents paid for my college, which I'm very thankful for. As a result, I was able to work an internship that paid very well, save up a lot of money, which was actually going towards something else that fell through instead of the GTR. So I wasn't actually planning to save for the GTR at the time, but that's regardless. So I saved up a bunch of money and I came out of college positive. I had a good amount of money to begin with. And then I worked my ass off in college to get a degree in something that paid very well. Then I got an internship, and I worked my ass off at the internship to prove myself so I could get a really good job. So that way, not only did I come out of college in the positive, but I also was able to get a really good job afterwards. I'm also lucky enough to have parents who are willing to help me if I get into a bad situation. If something happens and I just can't afford this car anymore, my parents will absolutely be willing to step in and help me. So having that insurance there helped reassure me, knowing that I would be okay if something bad happened. I'm not planning on it happening. It likely won't happen, but if it does happen, I know that there's a fallback, and that's something you have to consider as well. So I had these outside factors that helped me to be able to afford it. So it was a little bit easier for me. But the process was essentially, back in October, I actually borrowed my friend's car to learn how to drive manual. So I borrowed his car for a month, and I loved it so much. Just driving manual, it wasn't that great of a car as a Mini Cooper. I mean, it was a cool car, but it wasn't like anything like a Nissan GTR. But I loved it so much that I actually wanted to get a new car. And so I started looking at new cars. I was kind of hoping to get a manual, maybe a BMW or something like that. But in my search, I found the GTR, found the price, and basically what I did was I created an Excel file. And in the Excel file, I included as much as you could possibly imagine. I included my paycheck, less all my expenses, and what I expect to be able to afford after all those expenses are taken out. I also factored in incidentals, things that you can't expect. And I was absolutely conservative in my estimates for those. And by the way, conservative in your estimates means underestimating the good and overestimating the bad. So essentially raising the expenses so that way it seemed like I was getting less out of each paycheck. And then I put down how much money I could afford to put down in different, so I put out different scenarios. How much I would put down, which would mean how much I had to pay on the loan, and how much each monthly payment would be. So I basically gave myself three options if I put down this amount, or this amount. And so I went with 10,000, 30,000, and 50,000. And so that way I could look at, okay, well with putting down 10,000, I had more in my bank account after, but then I'd be losing more money with each individual monthly payment, whereas with the 50K, I would have a lot less in my bank account, but I'd be keeping quite a bit more with each monthly payment. And it's something you kind of have to weigh. So you can draw it out in each scenario to know exactly where your financial situation will be. And I did that, so I was able to realize that the best way to go was to put 50 down and finance the rest of the car and make monthly payments. So that way, that plus the insurance on the car would be a much smaller amount than if I just put down 10 or if I didn't put down any amount at all. And I highly recommend you guys doing this too. Just putting out as many situations, putting down as much as you can so you can say, all right, if I don't put any money down, if I put this amount down, this amount down, this amount, up to the maximum amount that you would be willing to put down. So you can see all the scenarios and see how you would fare in each of the scenarios. Once I selected the scenario, I essentially went on and I found a Nissan GTR that I liked at a local McLaren dealership. I went and looked at it. I loved it. It had all the features that I wanted. It was a 2017 with 2,000 miles on it in amazing condition for a really good price. And so I knew I wanted to do that. So the buying process at that point was essentially I had to apply for the loan, which I applied and I think I was accepted within less than 24 hours. Then I had to wire them the down payment, and it was the next day that I went to pick it up. So the buying process overall took less than a week, and it was actually just really easy. I just contacted them. The salesman on the other end was super helpful in really figuring out a lot of this, figuring out exactly how much I'd be paying every single month, everything like that. It was super helpful talking to him. But the actual buying process was super easy because he just simply sent me a loan application, which I filled out, scanned, sent back to him. He put it in. I was accepted within 24 hours. I sent them the wire. I went to the dealership the next day, filled out some paperwork, got the keys, drove it home, and then I owned a Nissan GTR. It was a very easy process. And if you go through a dealership, that's a much easier process than if you buy it from a private party. I don't know how easy that would be to go through a private party because I didn't do that. I went through an actual dealership. I went through a trusted dealership too in McLaren. And so the total process of realizing that I wanted to buy a car to buying a car took about 3 months. And the 3 months included everything from realizing I wanted to buy a car to trying to decide which car I wanted, to test driving different cars, to actually buying the car. It was an easy process, and if you have any questions about that, you can feel free to post it in the comments below, or the best way to do it is actually to follow me on Instagram and shoot me a DM. That's the best way to get in contact with me because I can give you a very personal response and we can have a conversation there. But you can send me a DM. I'm happy to answer any questions about the process. If you're outside of the US, it might be a different process, so I might not be able to help you there, but in terms of inside the US, it was a very easy process to go through. So that's about it. That's how I afforded the Nissan GTR. That's how you can afford a Nissan GTR. I hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to follow my Instagram, which will be linked down below. My Instagram has been blowing up a lot, which I really appreciate the support on that. It's been absolutely an amazing experience dealing with that. And one thing that I wanted to do is a lot of the Q&As I get asked questions that are far too long to answer in a picture. And so what I'm probably going to do soon, if you don't follow my Instagram, you'll want to follow it. I'm probably going to post a story where you can ask a question, and it's going to be a detailed question, something that I'm going to be able to answer in a video like this. And so if you want to see that and also be a part of any of my future giveaways, then be sure to follow that link down in the description. Thank you guys for watching. If you have any questions, be sure to comment below. Be sure to comment, rate, and subscribe. And as always, have a nice day.